There are many factors that a teacher can personally control in his or her classroom, but there are also some responsibilities that students must acquire themselves to be academically successful. These responsibilities are often called complex cognitive processes. Luckily, there are ways for teachers to implement these self-acclaimed responsibilities in their teaching and in their lessons to lead students onto the right track. Complex cognitive processes are an aspect of student learning and memory. These processes relate to the ways in which students make sense of new information in a way that helps them store it in their memory and retrieve it for later use. There are many methods that exist to shape student processes of acquiring knowledge and storing it in their memory so they could draw upon it again later. Some examples of complex cognitive processes are critical thinking and problem solving, though one of the most important examples is known as metacognition. Metacognition relates to self-awareness. For students, it relates to the ways in which they think about their own learning. Preferences in learning methods are often exposed for metacognition at work. When a student thinks about their personal best and worst ways to be productive, they are implementing metacognition. For instance, by a student deciding that they would work better in a quiet environment than in groups, that student can acknowledge their own personal preferences to being successful academically. The general purpose and importance of complex cognitive processes, and metacognition especially, relates to the level of autonomous awareness inside the classroom that it incites. With a greater awareness of how students acquire knowledge themselves, they can learn to regulate their behavior in order to optimize their learning. Implying metacognition in the classroom creates an environment of productivity and intrinsic motivation for students to be successful based on their own standards of growth. Now, I'm sure you are all wondering about some specific ways to implement this process inside of your classrooms, so I will go on to describe some great examples. You can teach your students metacognition through implementing movement inside of your classrooms. This would allow students to take a break and move around while also participating in an activity that involves movement. As a teacher, you must be knowledgeable and careful with the topics you include a physical activity in to optimize learning and support metacognition. As a teacher, you can plan activities that relate to lessons which complement movement. You could provide short breaks throughout the duration of class to refresh student momentum when changing topics, to let the students think about the topic on their own for a period, or to even let them eat a snack so they are not distracted from being hungry in class. You could also plan to have a class period outside to let your students move around in a larger area. A text titled Learning in Motion by Adelberry noted that daily activity helps boost balance, motor function, brain function, and cognition. Another way students can implement metacognition into their classrooms is by modeling. First, the educator should model or act as an example of a task students are required. Then they should provide the opportunity for students to reflect on the model and utilize their developing metacognition. Students will first experience the modeled strategy in their own learning, then compare their own performance with that of the original model, and finally take action to revise any ineffective learning or processing. This act in of itself is metacognition, or thinking about thinking. By adopting specific learning strategies, students are more able to apply the new content they take in effectively. It is the mental process of weeding out which strategies work for them, with those that do not work for them, that relate this classroom implication to metacognition specifically. While many students are able to find different learning strategies on their own, there are a limited number of them that understand how and when to apply them. Some conditions that could help teachers implicate effective learning strategies in their classroom include delegating appropriate tasks that incite complex thinking rather than a simple regurgitation of information, exemplifying the value of learning to students so they care about the goals they set in class, and finally supporting student self-efficacy by instilling an understanding for the positive learning outcomes that are a result of strong learning strategies and strong beliefs about their own ability. As an example, one learning strategy to bring to the students in your classrooms could be the use of links. LINKS is an acronym for a list of steps for students to organize, define, and remember words. The first step is the L, which means list the parts and identify the key terms. I stands for identifying a similar word, which will act as a reminder for students to help memorize the original word. N stands for noting a story. This relates to finding a short story that will help remind the student of the vocabulary word. The C is for create, and it is similar to the previous step, except this time, the student should create a picture in their head for what word they were trying to remember. The final step is S, which stands for self-test, in which a student should check their learning of the vocabulary word and the outcome of this strategy as a whole. The final classroom implementation that will be covered relates to metacognition as a support for transfer learning. Transfer learning relates to the application of previously known knowledge to a new situation or problem, otherwise known as bringing information from one context to another. Metacognition can help students evaluate a variety of contexts in which transfer might occur, and it should encourage them to be present in every classroom. If educators taught students about transfer as a concept, it would lead them to self-evaluate the content they learn in class and the learning skills in their personal repertoire, thinking about thinking. Furthermore, the presentation of transferring knowledge as a concept would ultimately lead students to think about applying the content they learn in varying scenarios, despite the context. Metacognition and self-monitoring can help students increase their awareness of whether a transfer strategy is necessary or working for them appropriately in any given situation. There are several strategies to implement complex cognitive processes and metacognition inside of the classroom, whether it's by bringing movement to class, acting as an active model, implementing learning strategies, or assisting transfer. Metacognition relates to self-awareness, and for students it relates to the ways they think about their own learning. There will always be factors in a teacher's classroom that they can control personally, but the real job of an educator will always be to teach our students to think themselves, to ensure that our students are self-motivated, reflective people that can be nothing but academically successful because they are so willing to learn.